Hey, second video here. I was going to wait to do this video, but when I got off my phone from doing my first video that's coming because it's a long one, I saw a comment on a channel I left. So I want to talk about that channel that I had left a comment on. So, I got my soda to help me guys talk. So, super excited about this. Super excited. We got Sylvester Stallone now. Check my community channel. Sylvester Stallone, the king of kings, right? When it comes to movies, he is now talking on a pro-life channel about his mother trying to abort him. How powerful is this testimony? So excited to see this. And I also remember back in the day, those feelings when life was a certain way. So I came from a Catholic background, very Catholic. My grandmother was not a real practicing Catholic, if that's what you want to call it. Her father in Pennacook, New Hampshire, had gone to a church, a Catholic church up on Bonnie Street, and her father was a very strict Catholic from what I understand. So my grandmother's side came from Canada, French Canadian, came from Canada. My grandmother was French, and small woman, petite, 5 foot, I don't know, maybe 2, dark hair, dark brown eyes, puppy dog eyes. She looked like she could have been Elizabeth Taylor in her younger days. My mother used to tell me she would see her mother dress up to go out with other men. And she was beautiful. So which book was it? I'm trying to think of a book. I think it was Stephen King. Someone had a book about Flowers in the Attic. That was the book. There was a book about, in this book, how these children were locked up in the attic. And they were locked up there, and it's not because of poverty. It's because this mother was super rich. She didn't start off rich. If I remember, now this is like from, I think, my teen years. I remember reading this. Excuse me. She wanted a man who was rich, and he would only take her if she didn't have kids. So she locked her kids in the attic for years so that she could get this guy. Finally, she gets him, right? And she's got all this money and everything. I think in the end, he finds out the truth, and the truth always comes out, and she is I think he is enraged with her and finds out the truth, and I think the money goes to the daughter instead of her. Anyways, in that story, the girl watches her mother get dressed for these extravagant parties, and she wants to be beautiful like her mother. I think most daughters, when they're younger, they want to be like their mothers, right? Their mother is their first example of what a woman is. So my mother saw her mother out with all the men and, dressed up at the bars, etc., while she was married to my grandfather. So my grandmother, although she doted on me as a little girl and I was her favorite, when I grew up, I found out the truth about what she had done and how awful she was to my mother, and all this stuff came out because my mother told me a lot. So my mom was brought up in the projects, Rimmon, Manchester, New Hampshire. And Rocky is talking about how his mother said if the coat hanger would have worked, she wouldn't have had him. That's pretty mean to say, right, to your own child, but it shows the emotional disconnect she had with her own son. I mean, what would the world be like without Sylvester Stallone, right? Huge fan of his. Proud of him for standing up against the woke movement recently. There's a new movie out today, I think it is, that he has out. I think it's called Survive. I think it's about helping with the sex trafficking movement. I just saw it last night real quick. So his testimony is his mother basically tried to get rid of him, right? He was not wanted. And I remember, like, in my family, my mother felt like she was not wanted, okay? Because, first of all, she was named Lee, which back then, spelled L-E-E, was for a boy, not for a girl. L-E-I-G-H would have been more appropriate. So in many ways, my mother was not wanted. And she was put in an orphanage, and when I did some research, it looked like St. Peter's over in Manchester. Nuns were mean. My mother could not eat tuna fish for ages because the nuns would serve that. And of course, they would hit you with a ruler on the hands if your hands were not on the desk. And just horrifying things that she didn't even tell me about had happened to her. So when she had us, I think it was very hard for her to want maybe us in some ways because her motherhood was not developed. She had to take care of my aunts and uncles when they were younger. She had 10, well, she was the oldest, so she had 9 younger brothers and sisters to take care of when she was only a child herself. And while my grandmother went out and enjoyed drinking with the men, and I told you that my grandmother had prostituted. This is where I come from, guys, so this is why I talked about in my last video I was such a mess. Because being with men was okay. It was okay to have boyfriends. It was okay to, like today, people have boyfriends all the time, right? So the standard was low, and it was higher for me, though, because of my dad. My mom married my dad. My mom was preoccupied raising us with her family still and dealing with her mother and all the drama she had with her mother. So, but my dad was the one who had the standards. Right or wrong, he had standards. And that helped me later in life when I was going the wrong way. To at least he had some sort of standard. So, so my mother, 9 brothers and sisters to take care of, rock Rimmon projects. My grandmother started off, Myrtle Opry, started off in Pennacook on a farm. And then her version was, at least we had water in the projects, right? My mother's version was she didn't even have a toothbrush. She had to, bread and mustard, 2 pairs of pants, rough life. She worked in the mills in Manchester, my mother, when she was older, and she handed her check over to my grandmother, who would drink it away or buy herself stuff, right, and forget about the kids. So my grandmother later on admitted she was not a good mother, etc. And she was a raging alcoholic to my mother. So you have Mummy Dearest there. So when Rocky talks about this, the life he came from, that his mother was like, she said, even when I bounced on the stairs, I couldn't get rid of you or something like that. And you see his daughter's horrified with this kind of talk. But this is the way it was back then. This is the way it was. Like, my mother was drugged up and doesn't even remember having me or my brother. So for her to want me to have an abortion, she did not have, the labors that like I had, where I was there and no medication and totally felt the labor. So back in the day when there was Valium, when people had, a breakdown or whatever, life got too hard, women had all this stuff that they could do. So back in my mother's generation, in my grandmother's generation, things were very different. And it's not up until like my generation that women started changing more, and, the feminist movement came out, which I am not. The new wave of feminism is bad. But back when we had voting, for women, we are now free with that and we're able to work and stuff. But I'm not saying all feminism is bad, But when it does come to relationships, like a video I just had out, I was talking about the intimate relationships between a man and a woman, that the man is the leader. And if you don't have that intimacy with a man, of course, that's going to sound absurd, right? Why would a man be a leader? But when you're in a loving relationship and you have trust, you can let that man lead. And it doesn't mean that you don't take initiative. It doesn't mean that you don't make some decisions. But usually that extreme independence does not bring intimacy in a relationship. So when I started working and going to hairdressing school and working at the Common Man restaurant, the first year of marriage, that was part of the breakdown of our marriage at first when I left, because we were not getting along. And I think later on when I worked, we also did not have the time that the marriage needed. But I had to work because the trailer, the roof was caving in, right? So, I mean, somebody's got to do something, and my husband wouldn't. So, when a woman works too much, or she's, not thinking enough of the man, the marriage can break down. And it sounds crazy, but you cannot serve two masters. You cannot be out working full time and then expect to have the quality marriage that is needed to work together. So I mean, I'm not saying women cannot work and have a happy marriage. It's all in how you do it, right? But when you're working full time, plus trying to get overtime, as I was, it makes it very difficult to have time for your marriage. Especially me, as an introvert, it's harder for me to take on too much sometimes. So I have to really focus in on my priorities, and I haven't always had time to have like a huge social life because I've had my priorities I've had to take care of. So I did have a huge social life when I was younger, but when I had kids, I didn't have as much time. So what we're seeing now with Rocky is, and I call him Rocky, Sylvester Stallone, is he's coming out talking about how he came from a bad home. I get it. I can relate so much to this. And so a lot of women back then would use the coat hangers. Luckily, someone said, luckily, abortion was not legal then. And luckily, it was not, because he would have been dead. And we hear the argument, oh, we need to open up abortion, or we're going to go back to the coat hanger days and the back alley abortions. It's actually harder to do that, to use a hanger. And how many people have been saved because abortion was not legal then, right? So I think I can relate to Rocky well because of the whole Catholic background, the whole Catholic thing he had. And God pulled me out of, a lot of that stuff. I just heard Rocky is saved. I hope he truly is. I hope he is. And I had left a comment about John 3:16. We want doctrine that is really good, right? And it doesn't always come from a church. It comes from a relationship, a personal relationship with Jesus. And in fact, back in the day when my grandmother went to church, when she did go, it really ticks me off how incompetent the Catholic Church was in that day, because she had a lot of wrong beliefs. And up until like some of the last times I saw her, she was telling me, we would talk about Christian stuff, and she would be like, you're not going to teach me anything. I know, I'm older than you, and I know stuff that you don't know, so you're not teaching me anything. And I would challenge her beliefs because she was in bondage, and she would pray the rosary, thinking that would save her. Or she would go to Mass, and one of my great aunts went to Mass like every day. And some Catholics have a personal relationship with Christ, and they like the tradition of the Catholic Church. But when it's teaching you the wrong things, like you have to go to a priest instead of going right to Christ, or you have to worship Mary, we're not to have any idols, right? I know a lot of people aren't going to like what I'm saying right now, but it's true. We're not to have idols. And when you go to confession for drinking or whatever you do, and you say, Father, forgive me, for I have sinned, please forgive me, to the priest or whatever. The priest is not God, first of all. The Pope is not God. And then you go back and you do it again. It's almost like a free pass to be like, okay, I'm forgiven, and now I'm going to go do it again. No, if you're sorry, you're going to try not to do that again, right? So I saw a lot of this stuff growing up that made no sense to me. And I think that's part of the reason why I had gotten really messed up too growing up. Because I had this, if I didn't have an uncle in jail or a grandmother doing this stuff with that kind of influence in my life, I was just seeing a lot of stuff that was not right. I saw a lot of violence. My grandmother was dating this guy, Mac. He got shot by a cab driver in Manchester because he was smoking. And then my Aunt Patty had her son kidnapped when he was little. It was all over the news. My Aunt Carol had her husband Bob died in an accident. He went to go get lottery tickets, and the guy was drinking and driving. He survived. Bob died, and my Aunt Carol was left with 2 kids on her own to survive, and it was catastrophic to her. I mean, I don't think she ever got over it. Bob was very into motorcycles, could take a motorcycle apart in his living room and put it right back together. His son looks just like him. And she was totally in love with him. So, I mean, I would see stuff like this, and, my Uncle Gary in jail for stupid things like throwing tires in a place he wasn't supposed to. He's dead now. I heard he dropped dead from a heart attack. He was in Manchester. He was in a garage, and I heard he just fell and dropped dead. My Uncle Leon's dead. Mark is still alive. Steve's still alive. My Uncle Bill died. My favorite uncle, heart attack. My Aunt Linda, last I knew, married 3 times. Lots of remarriage, divorces, etc. So it was really important for me to stay married because of everything around me, right? So I ended up, as I became a Christian, thinking, okay, I am staying married. So, anyways, whole point of Rocky is he is a huge testimony for life. Moms who do not want their kids, trying to kill them. Someone had said there's no accidental children, only accidental parents. And so Rocky Sylvester is a huge testimony for the pro-life movement, and he talks about how he had to relearn everything, how to have healthy relationships. Same thing with me. You have to redo everything. And I guess he didn't like board games, he didn't like Christmas, all because of his past. And unless you do the work to redo what you have learned with truth, which is why I want this channel to help women with truth, with what Christ has said, because he sets us free. He came to give us abundant life. So when you're brought up and you're a kid and you don't understand what's going on around you, you have these ingrained generational habits or lies. You're used to certain lies you live by, etc. So you have to reprogram the brain with scripture and the truth. And that is how you do it. So when people look at my life, and I had a relative say, Melissa, you're the only one who came out of this. You're the only one. People wonder, how did you do it? How did you go from having, I personally was not in the projects, but my whole family was, which affected me. How did you go from that project background? And luckily my dad moved us from Suncook, New Hampshire, into Epsom, New Hampshire, built a house with his own hands, and wanted better for us. If he did not do that move and did not put us in school, my mom did not go to school. I'm glad that I did go to school. Life would have been much harder for me. But because I had that generational background, with my mom very close connection there, right? With my mom and my relatives who were over all the time. If I did not have my dad, I would have had the same probably stuff going on. So you have to, that criminal mindset that some of my uncles had and stuff, the garbage, the prostitution, everything. How did you come out of that, Melissa, and become a wife and a mother and a homeschool mom, a mom of a military guy? How did you do it? And again, like I said before, it's the time. It's the time to redo stuff. And how do you get that time? Staying home, reading, being in community, mentorship, classes, and redo your life, redesign it. So as I've done this all my life, I am now redesigning my life again. And it's going to be able, it's going to help women to overcome that mindset, that poverty mindset. I'm more geared toward the projects. I'm more geared to those type of women, and how to help women not only choose yes for their babies, but how to come out of the mindset of the projects and have a better life. Okay, thanks for joining me, guys.